It's not about the dog of the dog. Wait, no. It's not about the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. This is a quote often attributed to Mark Twain, and a quote you can use in almost any kind of discussion about conflict and have everyone automatically agree with you. But anyways, we aren't talking about dogs today. The raid we will be talking about took place on the 18th of August 1919 at Kronstadt Harbor by 7 British coastal motorboats. But it is also important to note that this mission is a follow-up of an attack made by a single British motorboat, led by Lieutenant Augustus Agar, in which a Soviet cruiser called Oleg was sunk by the motorboat just 2 months earlier on the 17th of June 1919. See? Small dog beats big dog. Doesn't happen often, but it did in this case. Now, you might be asking, why are the British at war with the Soviets? And isn't 1919 already after World War I? Right, so World War I has ended, but the USSR, currently just the Russian SFSR, is fighting many uprisings that started with the collapse of the Russian Empire, and the British would rather have non-communist countries like Latvia and Estonia be independent, rather than becoming parts of the soon-to-be-formed USSR. Oh, and no, of course they aren't at war. Don't you know how wars work? Directly fighting with your own troops against another country's troops doesn't mean you're at war. As long as you just say it's some intervention or volunteer work, then it's all good. The British had already been intervening in the Baltic since the 26th of November 1918 to show their own strength and support Latvian and Estonian independence. Sorry, Lithuania, I don't know why you aren't mentioned in my sources, which by the way definitely isn't just Wikipedia. Anyways, the ship squadron which was sent to the Baltic was under command of Alexander Sinclair, and it did many things such as delivering ammunition to Estonian forces, bombarding Soviet positions, and evacuating the Latvian government, which was pretty useful when our map looked like this. Eventually though, Alexander Sinclair was replaced by Walter Cohen in January of 1919, and Cohen was allegedly pretty confused on what he was doing there. Then the French came to help him out and refused to do anything because they didn't want to show any hostility against the Bolsheviks. Cowen, however, had even fought with his ships directly against the Bolshevik Baltic fleet, and when the fighting slowed down, he received reinforcements. 2 coastal motorboats, the CMB-4 and the CMB-7, which were commanded by Augustus Agar. Sounds familiar. These boats were fast, lacked really any armor, and could carry a single torpedo, but these boats were capable of going through minefields without triggering them, and a well-aimed torpedo can be devastating for an enemy ship. These torpedoes could single-handedly take out cruisers. Let's get into the action. On the 15th of June, the 2 motorboats were sent towards Kronstadt Harbor's direction to find and engage Soviet battleships which had been bombarding another Soviet base for disobeying orders. Cowen had hoped that they would be able to easily do some damage and perhaps support the rebellious fort while the ships were exposed, but this actually never happened as the CMB-7 was damaged. However, the CMB-4, led by Agar on the 16th and 17th of June night, attacked alone, evading the destroyer screen and suffering from a mechanical failure. However, they managed to make some repairs while being within viewing distance of the Soviet ships, and got moving again. Then they realized that the Soviet battleships were gone and probably already back at Kronstadt, so they instead launched their torpedo towards a Russian cruiser Oleg, sank it, and then proceeded to return to base without any issues. Now, the fort that rebelled against the Bolsheviks had already surrendered though. Agar was awarded the Victoria Cross and a 5,000-pound bounty from the Bolsheviks.
$5,000? For me? Can I turn myself in?
A month later, Cowen received some reinforcements. This included the aircraft carrier Vindictive, which actually originally was supposed to be a heavy cruiser and not an aircraft carrier. Air raids were conducted upon Kronstadt Harbor, but they were ineffective due to the harbor's extensive anti-air defenses. Among other things, Cowen received 7 coastal motorboats, which he requested after Agar's raid. They were essentially twice as large and could carry 2 torpedoes. These are the boats that will charge Kronstadt Harbor. The August raid on Kronstadt was planned on board of the Vindictive, which was supposed to happen on the 15th and 16th of August night but got delayed due to heavy rain. No, I'm not going to make a joke about them being British and not tolerating rain. They are professionals and knew what they were doing. Finally, the mission starts. August 18th, 1 a.m. The 7 large motorboats depart from a Swedish island. In front of them is Augustus Agar, who is going to lead them through the minefield in his own boat. While the boats are on their way, another air raid is launched onto Kronstadt as a diversion. One of the large CMBs, CMB-86, suffered from a mechanical failure and was unable to continue on to the mission. So it was decided that the attack would be made in 2 waves, with 3 boats in each wave. They in total had 11 torpedoes with them, with one additional one on the CMB-4 that Agar is on. For the large boats, there are 2 on each boat, except for one which carried only 1. Every boat had 4 men on it, 2 officers, an engineer, and a Finnish smuggler who guided them. So far, the water is calm and everything is dark. Not wasting any time, the first wave commenced. 3 boats rushed into the harbor, evading the destroyer posted outside on guard. Once they were inside, the first thing they saw was a depot ship, and launched a torpedo against it, wrecking it, as you can see in this picture, which was taken after the attack. This aerial photograph was taken only a few weeks before the attack, and it was reported that the Soviet ships hadn't moved much since. So we can imagine that this is how the ships were laid out during the attack, and of course here is the depot ship that got sunk. But really, this was just the CMBs picking up their produce placed right at the entrance. Henceforth, it was the destruction of the depot ship that raised the alarm. The Soviets opened heavy fire against them, but then realized a series of pretty significant problems. Their coastal defense guns were gone, taken recently by the army for their own purposes, though I have no idea what the army was getting up to with 300mm cannons. Now, of course, the docked ships had weapons ready to fire, but these could not depress low enough to fire at the little CMBs. Small dog with a big fight advantage. Okay, I will stop making this comparison now. There were some guns that could have fired at them, but many decided not to due to the risk of friendly fire. Remember, this whole battle is happening inside a harbor. It's almost as chaotic for the Bolsheviks as a tank that has been breached by Yorkshire Terriers equipped with grenades. Dude, what are these comparisons? Can you really not think of anything better? One of the boats, already inside, moved east and launched both of its torpedoes against a battleship, one of which got a critical hit and caused it to start rapidly flooding at about the bow. Meanwhile, another boat was being illuminated by a searchlight, which caused many red units to start firing at it. They were in a bad situation. The boat was hit and its captain was dead. The second in command took over control, and just in time, the sound of aircraft could be heard, and shards of glass bounced off the concrete, as a British plane had just strafed the searchlight. Then the boat, which was just freed from the gaze of the spotlight, launched 2 torpedoes against the second battleship. Both torpedoes hit and annihilated a part of the harbor wall. The first wave, or what was left of it, began leaving the harbor as the second wave rushed in. One of the boats were immediately hit and had its torpedo launch system destroyed, so it turned around and left. This left 2 active boats in the harbor, but no! A boat from the first wave had not yet left and collided with a second wave boat. This caused it to sink. The surviving boat slowed down to pick up survivors from the wreckage. Meanwhile, inside, any remaining boats were now taking massive fire from all directions as the harbor was fully woken up. They fired the last of the torpedoes that would be launched that night, but none of them hit. One of the boats, about to escape, is sunk, but its crew still alive were rescued by the Bolsheviks and taken prisoner. Only 1 unharmed and 2 severely damaged boats were sprinting away from the harbor. They feared that the Russian fleet would soon come to pursue them, but nearby was Augustus Agar, who launched a single torpedo towards the harbor entrance. This scared the Bolsheviks and stopped them from deploying any ships until the boats could sail into the quiet, dark waters. 8 British sailors died during the raid, and 1 afterwards from injuries sustained during it. 9 men were taken prisoner by the Bolsheviks, but their sentences probably weren't very long. For the Russians, the damage was mostly material. The depot ship never returned to service. The battleship that was hit was inactive for the rest of the Baltic campaign. Even RAF aircraft managed to damage a destroyer. This raid would come to be known as the Scooter Raid, and inflicted wounds were much more mental than physical. The Baltic fleet rarely left harbor from then onwards for the rest of the campaign, and the British only reported seeing submarines and the occasional destroyer show up leaving from the harbor. And even the still highly active submarines had lost most of their spare equipment that was stored on the depot ship and were less effective for the rest of the campaign. The raid, however, caused the Baltic fleet to become loyal to the Bolsheviks, as until then they had suffered from internal factionalism. The raid united them. Mines continued to be laid in the waters near the harbor, and a few skirmishes followed, but the Baltic Sea remained relatively calm for the rest of the British campaign in the Baltic. Cowan's ships would later help drive back an attack on Riga and Liepaja by the West Russian Volunteer Army that was being supported by the Germans. Russia got tired of the war and signed peace deals with Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, recognized their independence, and mostly left them alone for a decade or so.